End of the Civil War, the greatest wealth builder in this nation was the back of a slave. That's what built the wealth of the society. Wall Street was set up and established and regulated off of the price and the value of a slave. Cotton prices, indigo prices, tobacco prices all followed the value of a slave. When slavery ended, the whole process shifted to the back of a slave. At the end of slavery, it shifted to Wall Street. And those became commodities in. And when the wealth building in this nation shifted from the back of a slave to Wall Street, they set up a new game. It was called monopoly. Now, and what black folk have been systematically lured into is a real-life monopoly game. Now, the monopoly game is based on some primary concepts. One is that you must be able to all sit down at the table, and everybody's supposed to get a fair share of the money. Once you get a fair share of the money, then you got a right to go around the table and try to buy land. But you want to buy the most valuable land and the best location of the land. Or you take your money and you buy basic businesses in the monopoly game, like the water company, electric company, and the railroad line. But you see, when black folk, they got out of slavery, they did not get their 40 acres and a mule, nor the $100. And see, the Republican, radical Republicans, the liberals in the Republican Party at that time, said, that was Benjamin Thaddeus Stevens and Sumner said on the floor of the United States Congress, that there's only going to be one thing that black folk will ever be in America. They're either going to be slaves or they're going to be free. But they cannot be free unless minimally they have 40 acres, a mule, and $100. But they didn't get it. But by then they were trapped into a real-life monopoly game. So now what blacks are doing are going around the real-life board, trying to play real-life monopoly with no money, no wealth. And all they do is go around the board and hope they'll land on free park or income tax refund. And if you play that way, sooner or later playing that real-life game, you're going to land what? On the wrong person's property, and you're either going to go to jail or go broke and get out of the game. And that's why black folk right now are making a major impact on the prison system, the criminal system in this country. Because I looked around in 1860, for instance, I looked at all the major cities in the United States. And that's like Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, Richmond, Virginia, New York, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Brook. Guess what? Even though you had less than 300,000 black people that were free or quasi-free, black people made up over 51% of all the prisoners. 51% of all the prisoners, and out of 5 million, only 300,000 of you were even free. And here we are, 150 years later, and guess what? You still make up over 51% of the prisoners. So when I hear all my civil rights leaders and all my civil rights friends, I don't care what it's Al or Jesse keep talking about, we've come a long way. You haven't gone any place. And quit BSing people and bamboozling people and black folk about how far we've come. You haven't come any place. You're still sitting in the same identical spot. As my mother would say, you haven't got a pot or one to throw it out of. That's our dilemma. We do not have any wealth. Now, I indicated to you a few minutes ago that the whole process of slavery maldistributed almost 100% of all this nation's wealth, power, resource, privileges, and controls of all levels of government into the hands of the dominant white society. Now, what does that mean in tangible terms? That when you only got 1/2 or 1% of the wealth, how can you compete with 1/2 or 1% of the wealth? When in this society right now, today, 150 years later, the average white person in America as a group got 3,500 times more money than the average black person. The average white has 3,500 times more money than the average black. I got 2 whites right now, some of them I know, they got more wealth than all 42 million black people put together. How, if 2 white men got more wealth than all 42 million black folk put together, what kind of game are you playing? What are you going to do? How can you compete? As a matter of fact, let me move it off to men. Let's move it to gender. For every dollar that a black woman has to run a household, the white woman has $100 to run a household. You're supposed to have enough money to be able to be self-sufficient. And this is true all around the world. Not just with blacks in this country. If I were to look at you got approximately 25 to 26% of the population is black around the earth. And you got over $300 trillion in wealth on the earth. And out of that $300 trillion, if I take all the African countries, the Caribbean countries, and Latin America, put them together, you still have 1/2 of 1% of the wealth out of $300 trillion. I go down to South Africa, and I've spoken in all these countries, and I've had trade missions in Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Bermuda, Barbados, all these, Venezuela, Colombia. I've been to all these countries, head of trade missions, representing presidents and governors. You can't compete in South Africa. In South Africa, with something like about 29 million blacks as an example, as a comparative example. 29 million blacks in South Africa. You got a little over 2 million whites. But guess what? They own almost 100% of all the wealth in Africa, the 2 million whites. As a matter of fact, in Africa, the De Beers family, one white family, the De Beers family, owns over 50% of the whole wealth of Africa. That means all the gold, silver, chrome, bauxite, magnesium, land, property, everything. And you want to know why they can't make it in Africa? They don't own and control anything. And so in America, if we're going to be a competitive group, we got to go back to what is the basic problem we can deal with. The biggest problem with blacks right now, they own no wealth. They control absolutely nothing. Not in the United States, not in Grand Rapids. I don't have to go around Grand Rapids to find what you got. I can guarantee you right now what you don't have. Or when you go into any city, you figure out who owns the buildings, the big buildings, who owns the communication system, who owns the banks, who owns the railroads, the bus companies. That's where your power is. If you don't control a sufficient amount of that, you are a guest. G-U-E-S-T. You have no power. They can do anything they want anytime you want them. So black folk don't have enough wealth to be a competitive group. You cannot compete. That's the first problem. Now that you know what the problem is a lack of wealth. And I'm going to get later on.